two. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to have you join us today. First of all, this is our last webinar of 2018. And because it was the last one before we go into the new year, we had to end with a bang. And that is why we have my very good friend, one of my favorite speakers, and definitely my favorite blog writer of all time, Dr. Tom Necela, here with us today. He is the man and the expert when it comes to how to prepare from transitioning out of practice. Whether you've been in practice for 1 year, 5 years, 25 years, it's never too early to start investigating this topic and having a plan that you're working on, which is why we have him here today. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Tom.
Hey, thanks so much, Christy, and thanks so much for ChiroHealthUSA to sponsor this webinar. And I'm super excited to talk to all of you about a very interesting problem, challenge, obstacle that some practices have in terms of transitioning. You know, as you might imagine, selling your practice or transitioning your practice so that you can slow down or move into retirement is always a challenge. But interestingly enough, those chiropractors who have really good and great practices, above average, outside the norm, find themselves with a couple unexpected additional challenges. And I like to call this the how to avoid the successful practice transition trap, because this is something that almost no chiropractors expect. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And again, if you're just joining us, my name is Dr. Tom Necela from the Strategic Chiropractor, where we like to say we want to help you work smarter, not harder, both inside practice, but really what we're focused on here is help transition out of practice. So let's dive in to our topic today, which admittedly, you've probably never heard of this thing called the transition trap or a success trap. And really, that's what it is. It's a trap based on your level of success. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with this house, but the same problem, same challenge exists with many very high-end homes. This is called the Sycamore Valley Ranch. You probably better know it as the Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson's former home, which went on the market years ago at the price tag of $100 million, and they have dropped it and dropped it and dropped it. I think its latest price is going for a mere $60 million. So if you're looking for a house, go get one. But more importantly, what we see is this is a very successful musician who had an above average, outside the box kind of house. Beautiful house. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's not destroyed. It's not a repo foreclosure where they pulled out all the copper wiring and all this stuff. But still, no one's buying it because they've never literally sold a house this expensive in the county in California where it's located, and because there are just few buyers. And really, here's the message for you. If you've got an above average practice, really big, great, high volume or high dollar or high income type of practice, you may find yourself in a similar situation, and we want to help you avoid this because you don't literally want to be bound to your business, trapped by your own success, and what would happen as a result if you're desperate to get out, forced into a fire sale where, you know, no one wants to say, hey, here's a practice and it's 90% off. That's not something you do when you sell a business. That pretty well scares away the buyers. I mean, you're not selling a product or anything here. So this webinar is for you if you meet one of these successful practice parameters. Either you have high collections, meaning over $500,000 a year, which is well above average for chiropractic, high personal income, over $150,000 per year, again, well above average for chiropractic, a high volume practice where you're seeing maybe more than 200 visits a week, or your clinic, your business is seeing more than that, or a highly specialized niche or technique, which would make your practice very, very unique and maybe a little bit tougher to sell. So before we dive in, I want to make sure that you're here in the right place. Which one of these are you? So just go ahead and type in the questions box. We're all anonymous here. I'm not going to share your numbers. I just want to make sure, hey, you're in the right place to hear the right presentation, because this is a very specialized transitions presentation for those of you, again, who have high back dollar practices. Okay, so if you're high income, say, yeah, that's me. Income, volume, niche, whatever it might be. Okay, that way we make sure that you're in the right place. And I see we have some people that are, so great. And let's also, I want to let you know that this is a reality check for you. But if you know a little bit about my story, it was a reality check for me, because I, like you, had an above average practice and found myself in a pretty interesting situation where I thought I had a strong practice and wound up to be in a weak position because I got sick. This is over a decade ago, and I was deteriorating. I found out that my practice was so great, it was dependent on me, and you may be in a similar situation. But it got one worse in that when I attempted to sell my practice and transition out, my big problem was there was no one giving me enough money that would get me through to what my practice was worth and get me through to the rest of my life, again, because I was a bit younger guy at the time. And so I went searching for alternate solutions. I talked to dentists, medical doctors, lawyers, and I discovered something really powerful, not only for my own practice and transition, but for yours as well, is that the fact of the matter is most chiropractors sell at the end after their practice is declined in value, and they don't really know how to sell or transition a big, good practice. But dentists do, medical doctors do, attorneys do, and they do it differently than we do. And I developed what I call a non-traditional transition. That's what I want to talk to you about, because the traditional way is, again, to sell when your practice is in decline at a fractions of a value. And that led me to loving life after practice and really to doing what I'm doing right now, and why we're here today is helping chiropractors transition smarter. I mean, you don't want to follow everybody else if everybody else has a practice that's half your size, selling for half the money, and not a great option, right? You want to do it smarter, and you want to avoid this success trap like some of these high-end homes that have to sell at a fraction of their value. Now, I want to let you know that, yes, like I said, I was loving life after chiropractic, after I transitioned my own practice. So, yes, it is possible, not only because I've done it, but because we've helped people do it as well in chiropractic. But you do have one big obstacle and 4 targets that are in your way. So let's talk about these so that we can figure out how to overcome them. And the one obstacle is what I like to call the shock pedal. Now, that's kind of a combination of 2 things. One, which would be shock and backpedaling. So what happens is when you have a really great, really big practice, you can absolutely shock some people, surprise people, because they might not know how much business you're really doing, how much income you're really making, or what kind of price tag you've really got. And then they begin to backpedal away if they become uncomfortable. That doesn't help you sell. Okay, that doesn't help you transition. You need somebody to come draw in and be attracted to your option, not backpedaling. Okay, now the 4 targets of people that are doing this shock pedal or backpedaling, the first obstacle is buyers. And literally, they have enough walls to climb over, enough hoops to jump through, but your practice actually will shock them even more. And one way, in terms of the first shock, is a financial shock. Okay, that means the price tag is going to be a little surprising for them. Well, first of all, virtually no buyers have a clue of how chiropractic practices are priced anyway. So in a way, all practices shock the buyer a little bit, but your price tag is going to be a little larger than the average practice, so it will shock them even more. The second shock they'll get in terms of financials will be the down payment. Now, in 2018, we had our first year ever where the SBA, Small Business Administration, changed some of the lending terms. And the good news is the down payment requirements to get a loan in most cases went down. It got easier, but it's still about 5%. So let's pretend that you're selling a practice for, $500,000. Well, 5% is they've got to come up with $25,000. Okay, if you're selling an $800,000 practice, that's $40,000, minimum, right? That's kind of the minimum. So that down payment might shock them. And then what will shock them on top of that is what we call the double debt load. Now, they're all in debt from student loans. And then when they look at the payment to get a loan to purchase your practice, then that shocks them as well. So that's really the first obstacle. Unfortunately, with your buyer, it doesn't end there because your buyer also has some additional shock pedals. One being clinical, meaning, hey, do they have the ability to step into your shoes? If you've got this awesome practice or superstar niche that you're doing, they're going to be a little nervous whether they can hack it clinically, whether they can hang with you, volume wise. If you're seeing 200 people a week or something like that, this person, they've never seen more than 50 maybe, whatever it might be, they don't know if they can do volume. Managerial, they might have never run a practice, or maybe they don't have the experience of running a big business as you, and that becomes an obstacle, a bit shocking to them. But it doesn't end there because we said, hey, there are 4 targets to this obstacle. The second target is actually the bank, because at some point with a big practice, it's highly unlikely anybody's going to be walking around with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in their pocket. So they're going to go to a bank for a loan. And here's what's going to happen to the banker. The bank shock pedal is, are you kidding? Your buyer has $200,000 of student loans, and you want to ask them to borrow. You want us to lend them $600,000 more to purchase your practice, and that is going to cause the banker to pass out. The other thing is the banker may not have experience or familiarity with chiropractic, and so they don't quite know how to assess your practice. They don't quite know the parameters to loan or anything like that, and that will become shocking if you don't have the right banker on board. The third obstacle can even be a practice broker, someone whose job it is to help businesses sell. But here I need to give you a really, really high-level overview of what small business and practice sales are like. Most of them are in decline. The practices are going down. They are what is called a fire sale most of the time. I mean, you have a doctor who's injured, who's old, whose practice is in serious decline, and maybe it was small to begin with, and now it's just, hanging on the rim of the toilet, and the broker's job is to sell it. So if that's what they're used to, they will be in shock, literally, when they see yours and maybe want to backpedal, because most brokers, their mode is to quickly sell the practice before it declines further. But that's not you. I mean, your practice is either A, not declining, or B, it's so big that it can decline a lot before it gets to anyone else's level. The second thing that the brokers might be a little bit shocked or surprised about is the immediate sale. In other words, when they tell you to sell and walk away or run away, some brokers will say, that's where their commission is as well. So, for example, if that's their mode and that's how they get paid, this is a traditional sale is all they know how to do. And if your buyer falls down and passes out and your banker passes out when you give them the sale price, then you need another option. And if the broker is not familiar with that, then really you don't get another option. And the fourth obstacle then becomes you, the business owner. And you may add some levels to this obstacle anyway, because your shock may be due to the value. I mean, you might think I've got a great practice and it's worth a ton more than it really is. Or you might think the value is too high and nobody can afford it. Its attractiveness may become a shock to you because you have patients coming from all over. You have gobs of patients all over the place coming in, tons of volume, never any problems with that. And yet, that's intimidating for some people. And it may not be as attractive for other people as you think. And then the liquidity becomes a bit of a shock because a big practice, just like selling a high-end home, is probably not as easily sellable or easily liquid as you would like. So this is not the kind of thing that you can say, hey, you know what? A month before I'm ready to retire, I put this thing on the market and it's sold. It's not that liquid. It's not that simple. But I do have good news for you in that there are some quick things that you can do to fix or surmount these obstacles. And in terms of the buyer, the first thing that you need to be very clear on is every interested prospect is not necessarily a good buyer or a good prospect. In fact, I've got a little saying that a buyer needs to be both attracted to your option and competent and confident enough that they could pull it off. So, in other words, just because they're interested, I mean, everybody's interested in a nice, great practice, but they may not have the clinical competence or the confidence to pull it off. Even more so, the financial competence or confidence to pull it off. And your buyer really needs to have all of those elements. Otherwise, they're not a buyer. Sure, you could say, hey, I've got $1 million practice. Are you interested? Yeah. Do you have any way to buy this thing? Well, no, I have no money. I've never seen more than 4 patients a week. And I've never run my own business. Probably not going to work. The second obstacle you can quickly overcome in terms of the bank is to work with banks that are experienced in practice acquisition lending. So really what I mean by this is banks are in the business of loaning money for sure. But practice acquisition purchases are a specific subset of lending. This is not an ordinary loan. They're lending you money to purchase an asset, but it's not a tangible asset in the same way as a house is. Okay, it's a business, and primarily what you're selling in chiropractic is called goodwill. It's not like a building or something they can repossess very easily. Okay, so they have to be experienced with that, and then they should be specialized in healthcare, because again, part of the bank's ability to lend to you is their ability to value or evaluate your practice in terms of, is this a good risk? If they've never even dealt with chiropractors, they don't know how to evaluate it. And then here's the other thing we find. Chiropractors, like medical doctors, dentists, podiatrists, and everybody else, have huge student loans. So if you don't want your banker to pass out, deal with bankers that are used to healthcare purchases and acquisitions, because guess what? All the medical doctors have student loans. So if your chiropractic buyer comes in with $200,000 student loans and the banker's used to that because he's dealing with medical doctors and dentists and podiatrists, it doesn't faze them. If they've never seen it, they will pass out and you won't get a loan for your buyer. Obstacle number 3 in terms of broker is you need to work with a broker or a transition consultant who will work with your best option beyond a simple sale. So for example, if I said to you, hey, you've got $1 million practice, you could sell it today to a buyer for $500,000. You go, whoa, that's like half off. And I said, or if you're willing to stick around and work with the buyer, you might have to discount it a little bit up front so they can afford it, but then they'll pay you on the back end for working with them for the management capacity or something. So maybe we sell it for $800 on the front end instead of $500. We give them a little bit of discount, but on the back end, they're going to pay you $300,000 for the next year. So you wind up actually getting $1.1 million as opposed to $500,000. Okay, we're going to talk about that option. But anyway, willing to work with somebody beyond that simple sale, somebody who can advise you on the best strategies for a multi-phase transition. Because here's the thing: if you've got a big practice, then you may not be able to get it sold in one step. You know, and you say the old saying, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." You know, you might have to break it up. And obviously, then having a broker or a transition consultant that's able and specialized at working with chiropractic practices, because they are different than other business entities. You know that. And then obstacle number 4, quick way to get around the business owner problem, which is your problem, really revolves around time and money. Having the time to choose your best opportunities for your practice situation and for your value, which will give you some flexibility with your options, and then also having the time to move to plan B. So really, plan B is, well, what happens when plan A fails? Okay, so if you have that, then you will overcome those obstacles. Now, let's talk about a few specific strategies that we can do then to ensure our success with transitioning our big practice. And the first is very, very simple. It's simply to start sooner. Again, if you're trying to sell or transition a bigger practice, you will have fewer buyers, fewer able buyers, and fewer people that are possibly interested or able to not only purchase but run such a practice. So it might take you a little longer, and or we have to break it into steps, as I just said. Now, in this, you need to know that you are up against the same thing as every other buyer in terms of timing your transition to maximize its value. And there's something that I call the sell curve that you are up against. And the sell curve is simply this. Every business has its own bell-shaped curve of how income is generated over time. So, for example, all businesses start down here in the struggle phase. They'll move to eventually the stability phase as they grow, and then everyone has their peak of success. Now, someone's peak of success might stop at $200,000 a year. Somebody's 400, somebody 800, whatever it is, and it may take you different lengths of time to get there, but at some point your practice peaks. Then you enter what I call the slack phase, where the same things that you did to grow the business, you kind of start to slack off. And so what? The income shows a little and kind of slacks off as little as well. And then you go to what we call the slip phase, where the income actually starts really declining. You're getting negative momentum. Now, if you were just to look at this graph and say, well, when's the best time to sell my business? Common sense would say, well, sell at success. Right? And then the reality is, well, at least if you can't do that, sell it slack and then try to avoid the slip. Well, the numbers show that 60% of small business owners will actually sell in the slip phase. Oops. 20% will sell in the slack phase, and only 10% will sell when they're on top, literally in the success phase. Now, if your math is good, you say, Tom, there's an extra 10% missing. And yes, there are some owners who will sell in this stability phase when their business is still growing. But most people have invested enough to get the thing off the ground, and it doesn't always happen. And then at the ends of the graph, in the struggle phase, if your business hasn't really made any money, there's nothing to sell. And yes, you can wait too long to where your practice slips so far down that nobody's willing to take a risk because they don't have the tools or are not willing to invest the money or their time to bring it back out of the ground. So in terms of start sooner, yes, you need to realize that this curve is applicable to all practices, all chiropractors, because you eventually do get tired and you eventually will see the decline of your practice if you stay around long enough. So number one is to start sooner. Now, strategy number two then is to understand the options that you do have in terms of selling, because I alluded to the fact that when I went and sell my own practice, that what we call the traditional sell and walk away, might not have been the best thing for me. It might not be the best thing for you. So there are several doors that you can open to best sell or transition your practice. So here are the 12 traditional or 12 primary transition options. One's called the traditional sale. That's where you literally sell the business and leave. The second is called the sell and switch. And the big difference there is instead of selling and leaving, you switch roles and you actually work for a defined time period for the new buyer. The next is an associate buyout, or what I call a buy-in and an earn-in, and you're familiar with those. And we're going to go into some detail on all these anyway. The traditional partnership, which is a 50-50 partnership or a merger. What we call the hybrid partnership, which is a variation on that theme. Family transfer, meaning your practice business is going to transfer over to a family member who's also a chiropractor. Remote management, where you get to sit on some island or some beach somewhere and manage your practice from afar. An investor sale, where an outside group comes in and purchases your practice with or without you in it. Liquidation sale, which is basically that you sell for the tangible assets, or record sale, you just sell the records, and a shutdown. Now, if you're on this webinar, first of all, you're not doing any one of these three because your practice is awesome. Unless you happen to die with your boots on, in which case you will be doing one of those three, and unlikely it's not going to go well. This box of these three options here are available to some people. But most people don't have a chiropractor in their family. Many of you can't or don't want to be remotely managing your practice when you're retired. And yes, there are investors who come and purchase chiropractic practices, but they have very specific parameters. Yours might or might not fit that. So what I'd really like to talk to you about and show you is some of the other options you might not be aware of. And the first two are these sell and switch and the associate buyout, and then one called the hybrid partnership. You see, Tom, well, why are you skipping a couple of those? Well, traditional sale you're familiar with probably, sell the practice and leave, right? But as we said, that is difficult to do with a very large practice because the new buyer might not have the confidence to be able to just take over while you immediately leave. The sell and switch allows you to stay around a little longer. Similarly, the buy-in or the earn-in is typically an associate who has no money. So I didn't circle that one because if you're looking to get out anytime soon and you have a large practice, how are they ever going to get the money to buy you out? I mean, let's say you want to sell your practice for $1 million and you have them as an associateship. Even if they're making $100,000 a year and they can somehow allocate $50,000 of that every year to go purchasing a practice, it's going to take them 20 years to be able to buy that practice. Most people don't want to wait that long. And then the traditional partnership is in many ways like the traditional sale, except it's a little harder. You're now asking somebody to invest in your business while you're still there, and you guys run it together. So they have to have some pretty good confidence in you. So I want to talk about these three, though. The first being the sell and switch, which is, by the way, our most popular, what we call non-traditional transition option that we've been helping people with for at least 5 years running now. And here's why. It's pretty simple in that you sell and stay on to work with or for the new owner for a defined time period. Now, you literally get your money up front because of you literally sell the purchase of the business, but then you get additional income on the back end working with or for the new owner. So what are the
Hold on, everyone. It appears that Dr. Necela is disconnected. Dr. Tom?
Hey, Christy. I'm finally back here.
Hi. Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry. So, where do you think we left off here? Sorry about that, everyone.
Dr. Tom?
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. That's the... Oh, hold on. I'm logged in 2 places. Let's see. We were... I want to say... I'm backing up looking at the slides now. Was it? I just panicked and now I can't remember. But it was about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, that's okay. Are we still live right now? And everybody's just hanging on, waiting?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we do this? I'm not sure where we left off. So why don't we just maybe move into a a questions period? And I don't know. I can maybe re-record the thing and send it over to the folks so they can get the whole thing. I don't really know where we panned out because, like I said, I tried to sign in a few times. But can we do that? Can you hear me now too? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So let's kind of dive into 2 things. One, so sorry for things kind of bombing out there. I'm not sure where we left off, but let me get to 2 things. First, how we can help all of you who are on the webinar today, and then let's move into questions. So we're just going to dive into this piece and portion here. So some of you may need to just learn more in terms of transitioning your large practice. As you heard from the webinar, or at least most of it, it's a little different than transitioning the traditional practice or even the traditional way. And if you are in that category that you have time to learn more, here's what it probably looks like. You want to sell or transition more than 5 years from now. Here's the good news. You have time to learn and to prepare yourself for when that day comes, and so that you can do it right. So what I want to offer you all is a transition checklist, which is also sort of a test to kind of see, engage where you're at in your transition, what you need to be doing to maximize the value of your practice. And if necessary, you want to go further than that, we also have what we call the Ultimate Exit Strategy Program, where we kind of walk you through the steps of transitioning your practice and give you more information on how that happens. So if that's you, then I would like you to either type in learn onto the question panel, or you can even go to strategicdc.com/learn, and you can check out those offers there. The second thing is there might be some of you who are listening here today that say, well, you know, I don't really have time to learn, or I'm in the phase where I'm wanting to launch my transition plan, or maybe you've even launched it and found out some of these challenges. If that's you and you need to launch your transition plan, meaning that you're ready to transition out or sell within the next 0 to 3 years, so from now till 3 years, or you have an existing associate that you'd like to launch the plans with and do it right, or maybe even that you want to search for an associate to transition to, here's our offer. Would love to be able to get you on the phone to discuss your situation, a free, no obligation strategy session call. So if that's you, then you can type in launch, and we'll set you up with a scheduler to schedule that free call, or you can go to strategicdc.com/launch. So let me put these 2 web addresses on there for you. And then I think the best thing to do in terms of just trying to make some lemonade out of the technological lemons that we had when we were disconnected and reconnected, is kind of just to move into a questions period. So if you have questions on what we've discussed today, or how to overcome an obstacle in your transition, would you just please type those in to the questions panel? And in the remaining time left, I'll just work my way through as many questions as possible, knowing that we're not quite sure where we bombed out in terms of technology. And then I'm sure that Christy and the good folks at ChiroHealthUSA will provide me with your information so we can actually get you this webinar as a recording, a full recording, and we'll make sure that you can listen to the whole thing at your convenience too. Okay, so in the meantime, again, just go ahead and type any questions that you might have, and we can try to handle those in a little bit of the time that we have left. And then, is that cool, Christy, if we just try to redo the webinar? And
oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. And do we have a few minutes left here too?
We do. We have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, good. So we can do that. And we've got a few minutes that we can be able to answer any questions. So let me go over to this question. And by the way, I realize that transitions are confidential. So I'll call out your name so you know that I'm answering your question, but we're going to use first names here so that you can feel free to ask any question that you need, and we're not going to divulge anything here. So let's go first over to Dr. Carl's question in terms of how do you do evaluation of a practice? Okay, so it's a great question, and I'm going to give you two answers to that. First, we do evaluations a little bit differently than most practice brokers or appraisers or anything. You have two types of valuations, and sometimes they use these words interchangeably, one being called an appraisal and the other being called an evaluation, okay? And an appraisal really is a formal estimate of value, and it has basically to adhere to IRS code and guidelines, and it comes up with one singular price point, and that's the price that you go with. Of course, you can probably see and smell the trouble coming, because your buyer's perception is always that it's overpriced, and your perception is probably that you want to get more than that price. So, but anyway, that's the way the appraisal works. We utilize a valuation, which is very similar in its goal in terms of getting you the price, but because it does not have to be written to the specific tax code specifications, you can actually come with a range of value. And the way that we do it here at Strategic Chiropractor is we actually use several commonly accepted valuation methods because, newsflash, there's no one formula. All the chiropractors love to ask that, and there is no universal formula to value a chiropractic practice. Rather, we are a small profession playing in the big world of valuations. Okay, so what we do then is take the price point from several angles, give you a range. That helps give you perspective. So yes, you can see, hey, according to this valuation calculation, the price would come in at that, and that might be the lower end, and here's the higher end, and here's what's in between. But that gives you some perspective so that you and your buyer also can see the range, because your buyer again wants to say it should be priced less, and you can actually say, well, actually, according to the highest valuation method, it could have been priced at this. And certainly give you perspective in terms of if your buyer comes in with a low number, you might be able to say, well, it's lower than I wanted or lower than this, but it's not as low as the lowest valuation. So that's how we do it at Strategic Chiropractor. Okay, so hope that makes sense, Doc. Let me know in the questions panel if that doesn't make sense. Okay. Then the other thing that I would like to say along with that, and this might have been before I cut out, but it also is incredibly important in terms of your transition. You know, I was talking about the big strategies to get your transition successfully home, let's call it. Okay. And the first big strategy was start sooner. The second big strategy was to understand your options. The third big strategy was to break it up into smaller steps. And then the fourth strategy, which I did not get to, but maybe the most important in the end, is flexibility. And when we talk about price and we talk about valuation, we talk about even transition your practice, it's incredibly important to remember to keep flexibility in mind. I understand and I know this is your baby. All chiropractors are the same way. You've built this with your blood, sweat, and tears. Nobody wants to hear their baby's ugly. Okay, everybody thinks their baby is beautifully and wonderfully talented and worth way more than we could ever put on a paper. But in the end, you are going to have to try to sell or transition that business, and it's got to come down to a win-win transition for both sides. So you having some flexibility will really help with the process. So if, for example, if we say, you know, your practice is worth $600,000 and you say, I will not take a dime less than $599, is, you know, or I need $650, you know, if you have no flexibility, then that may hurt. The other thing is flexibility with your options. Some of you have in your head, I want to get out at 65. Well, if you've got a really great qualified buyer that somehow would want you out at 64.5 or 66 or 65.5, whatever it might be, having the flexibility in terms of your time frame will really, really help. Having flexibility in terms of, yes, this might be my plan A or option A, but I'm willing to entertain plan B or option B will really help make you be able to succeed. And then a final component of flexibility is what I just like to call creativity. Having the ability to insert some creativity in a deal to make it work well for both sides. So for example, I didn't get a chance to share you with this. We had two, what I consider creative and successful transitions this year where it was a surprise. It was a curveball in that, for example, on one of them, the owner went to sell to his associate. That was all great and fine until at the last minute, the bank came back and said, we'll fund this if you sell him the business and the building. Well, that wasn't part of the owner's original plan. But when it panned out, it was a very good deal. And so the owner had flexibility and he made it work. And so he went from basically a $400,000 transaction to a $900,000 transaction. And it was great for both sides. Similarly, we had another deal this year that the owner wanted to be out in a couple years, but he had a fantastic buyer that really wanted to be in the driver's seat right now. So we were able to do the sell and switch where the buyer was able to get the business ownership, but the owner on the back end was able to obtain an employment agreement where they would be paid upfront for the sale and on the back end to be able to work for the next couple of years. So that's what I mean by flexibility or creativity. So with that said, again, apologize for all the technical errors there. If you do have additional questions that we weren't able to get to because of the problems or because of the time frame here, then go ahead and feel free to email me, info@strategicdc.com, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. And if you are in the phase where you're ready to learn more, then please take us up on the offer to strategicdc.com/learn. We'll get you that transition checklist and we'll get you a discount on the Ultimate Exit Strategy Program. If you're in the launch mode, then go to strategicdc.com/launch and love to chat with you briefly on the phone about your situation and how we might be able to help. So I'll turn this thing back over to you, Christy, and apologize for the technical errors there.
No worries. You know, every now and then these things happen, but this is the most popular topic and one that we get the most requests on the webinar series. So I assure you we will work with Dr. Tom to get him back on the calendar, back scheduled with us again in the new year. So no worries. Make sure that you do reach out to him and his team at info@strategicdc.com. Find out more information, learn about this. This is such an important topic of discussion, and I think it's never too early to start thinking about your exit plan. You can't look into a crystal ball and see what the future holds. So, always working on something so that you can have a smooth transition into retirement. That's not a bad thing at all. And just a reminder, this is our last webinar for 2018. We will be back on January 8th, 2019, starting off with kids chiropractic and personal injury, what the research says that supports the need for care. A lot of times when we talk about personal injury at events, you don't hear a lot about children. So join us for that webinar. You'll see that we have webinars that are being added every single day all the way through the end of the first quarter. We've got some on marketing, some on multidisciplinary practice, on communication, on research. So check it out. Register early. I hope everyone has an amazing holiday season and a wonderful new year, and we look forward to having you join us back in 2019. Bye-bye, everyone. Dr. Tom?